Why is more than 98% of our DNA not used, yet does not disappear? Why are there functions in our body that aren't utilized to their full potential? Why do they still exist? Why do we have such large brains, yet do not use them to their full capacity? Because these systems are waiting for activation. This is our divine aspect. Yes, it requires great effort. Yes, it requires strong will. But as with everything else, once this system begins to activate, everyone says the same thing. It was worth the effort. I believe the Egyptians have many secrets within their culture that we haven't been told about. Imagine the pineal gland as a radio receiver. It is a tiny gland located between the back of your throat and the back of your head. The primary function of the pineal gland in normal three-dimensional reality is to produce two neurotransmitters called serotonin and melatonin. Of course, it has other functions, but let's talk about this one. Most of a person's thoughts are connected to specific feelings that affect particular hormonal centers in the body. For example, if you think of anger, certain chemicals are released that activate your adrenal system, triggering survival systems. If you feel suffering, pain, or guilt, you invoke another biochemical reaction that activates other hormonal centers. Thus, most thoughts and feelings consume a large portion of the energy of those thoughts and store them in the first three energy centers of the body, commonly known as chakras. The first three centers are the centers of survival, reproduction, consumption, and response, fight or flight. Most people exist in such a state. In most cases, people spend a significant part of their lives in a state best characterized as survival. In these moments, it's not the best time to open your heart, and only a few people truly make the effort to do so. Most of their thoughts and feelings activate the lower centers, so most of the body's energy is retained in these first three centers. On average, 95% of this energy should be released and directed to the brain. We use breathing as a way to lift the mind out of the body or elevate energy. Breathing involves the contraction of internal muscles, including the pelvic muscles and those at the front and back that we use for elimination, as well as the lower and upper abdominal muscles. When we inhale through the nose, we squeeze those muscles. We draw energy from the lower centers and redirect it to the brain. When you wake up in the morning and open your eyes, they perceive the wavelength of visible light. These light waves hit the optic nerve, which sends a signal to the core and then to a specific part of the brain. Suddenly, the pineal gland receives a signal to produce a chemical called serotonin. Serotonin is the daytime neurotransmitter. When our brain shifts into so-called beta wave patterns of brain activity, we become alert, aware of our body and environment as well as time. When light disappears and it becomes dark, the pineal gland stops producing serotonin and begins producing another substance called melatonin. Melatonin is the nighttime neurotransmitter that alters brain waves to alpha, theta, and eventually delta waves, allowing the body to enter the phase of restorative sleep. Serotonin keeps us awake, while melatonin puts us to sleep. This is the function of the so-called circadian rhythm, which is regulated by the rising and setting of the sun, to which people adapt. When the pineal gland activates, tiny crystals appear within it. These are calcium carbonate crystals shaped like rhombuses. When the pineal gland activates, these crystals begin to shimmer and undergo electrical activation. After activation, they become sensitive to frequencies, as light frequencies must pass through the eyes and sensory organs. When they activate, they begin to perceive frequencies that are not sensed by sensory organs, converting them because they carry information in very deep images. And now a person experiences an inner vision. This is why it is called the third eye. This inner vision is much more real than anything you have ever experienced in your three-dimensional reality. It is a very low frequency, but it is very fast. And suddenly the pineal gland starts to produce metabolites, melatonin. The substances produced by this gland create very powerful antioxidants capable of healing cancer, slowing aging processes, preventing cardiovascular diseases, strokes, neurodegenerative diseases, inflammation, and combating microbes. If you take a molecule and make alterations, you end up with benzodiazepine. What is that? It's Valium. Melatonin already calms you, but now you will truly relax. The survival centers in your body will be turned off because that's what benzodiazepines do. Now you will feel relaxed. The first 3 centers involve loss of sexual desire, appetite, and concern for the environment. Your body no longer submits to the mind, it no longer controls you, and now you can dream without hindrance. When you breathe normally, while simply resting and breathing, the seams of your skull slightly open, and the bone at the base of your spine, called the sacrum, actually bends a little. When you inhale, the seams in your skull open and the sacrum bends backward, facilitating the flow of cerebrospinal fluid. Upon exhaling, the sacrum bends forward, the seams close, and the fluid rises. Thus, inhalation and exhalation begin to create a wave. Cerebrospinal fluid consists of proteins, salts, and a solution. The proteins and salts in the solution carry a charge. When you place them into the solution, they acquire a negative or positive charge. So, when you start inhaling and pulling cerebrospinal fluid to the brain, accelerating these charged molecules, according to physics, an invisible field called an inductive field is created when a charged molecule is accelerated. Now, information is continuously transmitted from the brain to the body and from the body to the brain. But when you perform this breathing and start accelerating these charged molecules, you create this inductive field moving in a specific direction, and suddenly all the energy from these lower centers begins to move upward to the brain. If you do this correctly and feel passion beginning to move this fluid, there will come a moment when the sympathetic nervous system activates and merges with the parasympathetic nervous system. And when this happens, suddenly all the energy that you use for conceiving a child, all the energy used for digesting food, all the energy used in a stress response, instead of being chemically released, is pulled upward to the brain. All this energy is directed straight to the limbic brain and reaches a gland called the pineal gland. It produces a chemical substance, the same substance found in electric eels. Now, the nervous system becomes enhanced, it becomes electrical, and your brain switches, filling with a great deal of energy. It produces the same substance called dimethyltryptamine, which is a very powerful hallucinogen. And now your brain will literally perceive another world that will be more real than this one. We activate this system because I want people to realize that they are non-linear beings living linear lives, and that we are multidimensional beings living multidimensional lives. And you only need one experience like this and you can no longer return to your old self, because you realize that this is probably an illusion, right? But it is also more real. In biology, there is an important principle that states that nature never discards anything for no reason. In nature, there is a principle. If you do not use something, you lose it. Why do we have more than 98% of our DNA unused, yet it has not disappeared? Why do we have various functions in our body that are not utilized to their full potential? Why do they still exist? Why do we have such large brains and not use them to their full capacity? Because these systems are waiting for activation. This is our divine aspect. Yes, it requires great effort. Yes, it requires strong will. But just like everything else, once this system starts to activate, everyone says the same thing. It is worth the effort. When you start to move the cerebrospinal fluid, at the end of the pineal gland are tiny cilia that begin to tickle the hairs when the fluid starts moving through the brain's cavities. When people inhale, hold their breath, and move this fluid, pushing it up to these crystals. These crystals, according to research, have piezoelectric properties. What does that mean? When you compress these crystals, mechanical stress is converted into an electrical charge. As soon as they are electrically activated, they begin to shimmer. When they start to shimmer, they begin to receive information, and now it is like a radio receiver. This system will receive information, transforming it into images. When this hidden mechanism activates, people say, "I want the unexplored," but it turns out that when it arrives, it is immense. Our research shows that when this system activates in the brains, the entire limbic system of the brain, the limbic brain, literally explodes with activity. It becomes very active. But what is the limbic system? It contains the pineal gland, pituitary gland, thalamus, hypothalamus, the bridge of the cerebral hemispheres, a small fragment right below the hippocampus, and the amygdala. It is a complex system used as an additional component of this part of the brain. Our research shows that when this limbic system activates, a person becomes a creator. So transform yourself with your mind and then accept and yield, allowing this system to connect with your energy and begin transforming it into experience. Glad to see you and see you again.